Hi, Internet. This is Justin, and we're gonna try a podcast now because we tried a Let's Play series and So I'm Justin, and that's Jarenth over there.
Hi, I'm Jaren. You probably didn't expect me here in this Ninja Blues podcast, which is the website that we run and nobody else is involved with. What a surprise!
Yeah, it's fucking weird.
Anyway,
Um,
welcome to the Discourse Dojo.
Discourse Dojo. That's the
Dojo!
extremely clever name for our podcast.
Listen, it's extremely clever. You don't
Okay.
even get to talk smack about it.
Yeah, I don't want to hear shit in the comments. Um, but yeah, so we're gonna talk about games generally, I guess. And today we wanted to talk about Unrest.
Okay, so before we go into the actual podcast, maybe a little bookkeeping. Unrest is an RPG game of some difficult to pin down sort that was funded through Kickstarter a little over a year ago by a company called Pyrodactyl Games. It aimed to be an unconventional RPG set in ancient India, which is actually the subtitle. And the Kickstarter tried to get $3,000 and actually made $36,000.
Yeah.
It's a game that we've both been kind of interested in from the start, if only in part because the lead writer of the game, Rutskarn, is obviously an internet acquaintance of ours. And probably
Yes.
of yours as well if you're on this website. The chances are significant.
Yeah. Rutsgarn, he's a cast member of Spoiler Warning, which is hosted by Seamus Young, and as far as hard truths go, the fact is that Seamus is probably responsible for a very large portion of our viewers knowing about our site in the first place.
Looking at traffic stats, if you are here, there is like an 80% chance you came from Shane.
Yeah.
If you're not, we still love you. Welcome. Glad to have
Yeah.
you here.
We have
Anyway,
viewers from
Unrest, an
all over.
unconventional RPG set in ancient India. It's been in development for a year. It launched recently. We played it, and I was going to do an Indie Wonderland about it, but then Justin also played it, and we both had thoughts about it, and we figured that, hey, why not try to turn this into our opening podcast?
Yeah, because we've had
So,
the idea of a podcast for a while.
as you do on the internet.
Yeah. So we're gonna go into spoiler territory, but first, let's just say, like, Jareth, do you think, like, what are your very general, vague thoughts about this game?
My very general, vague impression of Unrest is.
Yeah.
It's that it has some good points that are really good, and then it has some points that I think are less good. And this is something that I do in my columns as well a lot, is that it can be hard to reconcile them. That the good points and the bad points don't cancel each other out or they don't blend, they're just kind of separate entities.
Yeah.
And that makes it tricky to talk about, but obviously not impossible. What did you think?
I feel like it's a pretty good narrative in its own right. It's an okay narrative, and since it's basically the entire game is about the narrative, that like it's a pretty good narrative built atop a really good engine for dialogue and like dialogue driven games. Um, it's got some smart innovations, but it kind of fails at what it promised in the Kickstarter pitch. And that is where I think most of my frustration and my disappointment comes from.
Alright, that
Um
is interesting.
yeah, because I won't say that it's a bad game. I enjoyed the story for what it was for the most part, I think. Um and it's got some really smart ideas. I was really impressed by certain aspects of the game, but I can't help but feel disappointed walking away from it.
Alright, that's a fair summary. From now on, we should basically be in spoiler territory, so if you
Yes.
use this time to look up the Unrest game page or Kickstarter and you're like, wow, this looks interesting, I still, knowing what I know, recommend you just get it and play it. It takes a few hours for a single playthrough,
Yes.
and it's just, don't let us spoil that part of it for you. It's still
Yeah.
fun enough, and especially the writing is still good enough. That's definitely worth the asking price. That said, we are probably going to gripe about it a little bit.
Oh yeah,
And by a little
absolutely.
bit, I mean probably most of the podcast.
Yeah. So
All right,
let's hang
spoiler
up the
zone
banner.
initiated.
Yeah, spoiler zone.
Ooh, spoiler zone.
So I felt my original plan when I was going to write my Talk of the Ninja post was I was going to open with the quote from like Rutskarn, his like monologue on the Kickstarter pitch video for Unrest made me very tentatively hyped about the game. Um, and I
Semi-hyped.
Yeah, like hyped and also apprehensive because I'm like, are they gonna live up to this? I don't know, but it's Rutskarn, so I held some hope. Um, so I'm just going to read a few quotes from his opening pitch that I feel are very relevant when talking about the game as it stands today. He said, "One thing I've observed in my years of playing RPGs is that the most fun you can have in an RPG is when the game recognizes what you're trying to do with your character and incorporates that into the narrative, when it acknowledges the choices that you're making." Um, and then when talking about Unrest and how it was going to work, he said, "There are three main chapters, and in each one you play a different character. And whether they succeed or give up or fail or change their mind or die, that becomes part of the storyline. That becomes the narrative that's passed down to the next chapter. So on the one hand, the storyline goes on no matter what, but on the other hand, the risks you choose to take have real significance." So basically, the premise of this game and how they were selling it was choices having consequences for the narrative and for the characters that you were playing. Um, the way this game works is that in each like section of the game, you're playing as a character that the game gives to you. It says, "Hey, you're a Naga ambassador, and you're here to talk to the king and queen about the trade dispute." Um, but
Hey, you're a peasant girl, and you're gonna get married to somebody that you don't like. Hey, now
right,
you're a princess. Now you're a mercenary captain.
yeah, it like trades off between characters in a sort of like storybook approach. It's like a bunch of connected stories that all go on in chronological order as this big city gradually falls into a state of panic and disarray and indeed unrest. Um, the problem is that while I feel like they really nailed the engine that this game works on. It has some really nice features that I feel like they really committed to this idea of dialogue driving the narrative and role playing driving the narrative. In the actual content, in the actual story, not much actually changes. I mean, technically things change based on your choices, but like the idea of a character living or dying becoming the narrative that's passed down to the next chapter, it really doesn't feel that way, especially after you've played more than one playthrough.
I want to say here that to start off with the slightly more positive point, the actual writing and the world building in this setting are all incredibly good.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
That
don't
is
want to
something that
diminish
I just
that.
want to get out there before we start griping too much. That I really got into the setting. It's set in ancient India in a city that may or may not be fictional. I think it's fictional because of all the giant snake people that are running around. Called Bimra, and the general setup is that when you start, the city has had a dry spell, the monsoons haven't shown up, food is becoming an issue, and large slums are popping up. And the king and queen of Bimra are making a deal with the Naga Empire, which is run by giant snake people, in order to trade food for free access to the city for these Naga. And then shit happens, and fans are hit, and the city just falls into a bad time. Let's call it a
Yes,
bad time.
a bad
And
time. That's a good way to
what I
put it.
what I really liked about the whole writing is that it doesn't hit you over the head with mandatory lore. There are lore dumps. Every character has other characters that they know, and pieces of history that they know, and areas that they know, and you can look these things up. But it's also just in the writing and in the interaction that certain things organically become clear. That,
Yes.
like, human beings hate Nagas, for instance, especially in the slums. And then you're like, well, they might just be racists, because a lot of them probably are just racists or speciesist or whatever you want to call that. But then you talk to people and they're like, well, but one Naga eats enough food for an entire family per day, and they have these weird exotic illnesses that humans have no defenses against, and they're really naturally violent and hot-tempered, and they tend to just start fighting. And you're like, okay, that makes sense. Now I understand why, like, what the relation between the humans and the Naga in the city is, and why they would or would not like each other.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, you have people that defend the whole Naga coming to Bimra as refugees and immigrants, because like there was a merchant in one chapter that if you talk to him, he'll tell you all about how the trade agreement has just completely bolstered the economy for the merchants and stuff. And I mean, that guy was pretty freaking classist, because he was saying that it's like the trade is way more important than what's happening to those damn peasants, or those slum rats. Yeah. So yeah, that's a valid point against him. But the point is that there are upsides and downsides to this, and it depends heavily on the perspective of each person in this world, where they stand on the whole issue. And that is really interesting. It's a really great world building.
Yep. And because the game actually switches between perspectives through the characters that you play, you get this overview of how the world works from different viewpoints. Like at one point you're a peasant and you're embroiled in the caste system and you work on the farms, and then you're a mercenary captain and you're actually tasked with defeating an uprising and you're more high class. And then you're a slum rat and you walk around in the slums and have to find food to survive. And in each of these cases, like one of the things that I liked the most, that I vividly remembered liking the most, is that, for instance, you can find items. We'll get onto that in a little bit. And one of the items that multiple characters have with them is just a loaf of bread. But if you're a slum rat, the loaf of bread is being described as like a major treasure, enough food to survive for a week. And if you're the mercenary captain, it's just, this is a stale lump of bread. It's, I can deal with this.
Right.
And it just gives you these different viewpoints of the situation and the city that contribute to you getting this idea of this image of a city slowly in decline, with people trying to save themselves or trying to work together and trying to make the best for the city and making decisions that do work out or don't work out.
That's right. I actually thought it was really interesting that the inventory feature in the game was mostly just for flavor. It wasn't really... There was no inventory management, and the only time you would want to look at it from a practical standpoint was like when you're in the priest chapter and you're supposed to hand out like 6 vials of medicine throughout the slums. You might look and be like, how many vials of medicine do I have left? Okay, I have 4. That gives me an idea of where I'm at. But like, other than very specific situations like that, it's mostly just there so you can look at the items the character has, and more importantly, how the character describes each of those items. And that also extends into the like journal and the codex, because a ton of games like this, like Mass Effect and whatever, have like codexes that you can read about the people and the places and like specific events. But in this game, you can read about it, again, from the perspective of each character. And that not only helps give different perspectives and give a better impression of the world building, but it also helps you in a short-term sense figure out how to roleplay the character you're playing. And that actually segues really well into, like, I think my favorite thing about this game is that a lot of games like Mass Effect and whatever just say, okay, we want to let the character roleplay. We're going to give them 3 options in each dialogue where they can be nice, neutral, or mean. And there we go. That's good enough. Whereas Unrest, basically, it feels like they said, okay, we're not selling this game with the combat. We're not going to shove in vehicle sections, whatever. We're committed to a game about role-playing. How can we systemize that in the best ways possible? And the answers they gave were really cool. Like, hey, how about the player can press one button during any dialogue and open up the journal, and have it automatically open to the page about the character that they're talking to right now. I don't know about you, but I have a hard time remembering all the characters in these games that are about big, complex political intrigue and factions and betrayals and everything. I have a problem with that, probably because I have a shitty attention span. But it's very helpful for a game like Unrest to say, hey, you forgot who Ranveer is? Here, click this. It turns out he's the guy in charge of the church who's trying to manipulate the slums by giving out loaves of bread and medicine and preach about how the Naga are evil. Stuff like that. And you learn about what the character you're playing thinks about them from a general sense, so you can say, okay, how can I play this character in a way that fits that?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, I really like that system too. On the other hand, you say play the character in a way that fits them. One of my minor gripes is that with some characters, I had real difficulty figuring out what the character was about. For instance, the mercenary captain, Chiam, who is one of the only names I actually managed to remember somehow. He can be nice to Naga or indifferent to Naga, or he can hate them, and he can be all protective about the people in the slums, or he can just ignore them, and he can just be like a casual a mercenary who only fights for money, or he can have some sense of honor, and these are all options.
Yes.
And it makes it difficult for me to figure out how to read a character if the game basically says, "Oh, he can be whatever you want to be." Which, I mean, it's on the one hand, it's a good thing. I know that a lot of people like this, but on the other hand, it feels less like there is a character and more like just an engine for decision making.
Yeah, Xiam was definitely one of the more vaguely defined characters, and I did enjoy defining him how I saw fit.
It works.
And that actually was helped by another feature called traits, which ended up being something I wasn't expecting, because when I first saw it, basically the way it works is when you get a character, it starts out with two traits, 2 or 3. Those just define what that character exists as, and a very basic personal summary, like this character is a father and this character is a priest. But as you start talking to people and acting certain ways around them, traits will be added to that list that are it's like this character is a hard ass if that's how you talk, or this character is an opportunist, or this character is compassionate. And I was expecting that to actually have some sort of impact where other characters, when you're playing as somebody else, people would describe that person as having that personality, and maybe even that person would show up as an NPC later and they would act the way you played them. It didn't do that. That was kind of disappointing. But once I realized that, I guess my impression was that the traits are there to help you, help remind you that you are playing the character that you envision out of this premise of a character. Like you can play the peasant girl, who is she doesn't like where her position is, but she's willing to go along with things as long as she knows that she will eventually benefit from it. Or you can play as a really defiant peasant girl who's not willing to put up with this bullshit and just wants to get out. Even one who is more willing to die than to, do something that she just is not comfortable doing.
See, but it doesn't actually work that way. I expected the traits to be something more like, say, New Vegasy, where you get a trait and then later on that trait influences conversations in some way. Not necessarily the whole AI thing that you were talking about, but more like if you're humorous. Like, for instance, if you're the snake ambassador, the Naga ambassador, you can either be really venomous to people and talk about, oh, your city kind of sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah, really
it's probably super weak.
Insults,
or you can be nice and charming, and you can make jokes, and then somebody tells you, hey, are you going to go walk around the city with me? And then you'll say, no, I don't like walking. I don't really have the legs for it. And then everybody laughs, and you're a charming snake. And I had expected stuff like that to come up later.
Yes.
Or at least influence you in some way, but it really doesn't. Because the second time I played the Naga, I started out being super mean, and I got the venomous trait, and then to one character I was this jovial snake lady making jokes, and that also got me the humorous trait. And it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, yeah.
It's really just a system of letting you remember which conversation flags you tripped. That's kind of the
Yeah,
impression
from
that
a
I got from
practical
it.
standpoint, that's basically how it functions. And I think that is one symptom of like the ultimate tragedy of Unrest is that they really nailed the engine and they failed to follow up with the actual content.
Yeah,
As far as role playing goes, as far as the world building goes, it's fantastic. The writing is really great. The characters are good. The plot is okay. But yeah, and by the way, as far as that Naga ambassador goes, took me until my second playthrough to go, wait a minute, now I see why he's 1 day away from retirement.
that happened to me the first time. But
Yeah,
yeah, Unrest is a game that has interesting characters and good world building, and I wasn't really sold on the whole character jumping initially, but now I see it for what I think it's supposed to be, which is to offer like vignettes into different perspectives into this world. And it's a
yes,
really interesting mechanism for going through this story.
yeah,
It's just that that is kind of what it is a very interesting mechanism for going through a story about an Indian city in decline.
yeah, and it's yeah, because that's what I feel like. It's not. This isn't a story about a character or a group of characters or anything like that. It's like a story about the city, and
Which isn't bad in and by itself.
yeah, and it seems like that city is basically screwed no matter what choices you make. And you could say that's some sort of deliberate theme. That actually kind of reminds me of you remember Mass Effect 3's ending sucked, and everybody shat on it, and then Film Crit Hulk jumped to its defense and said that Mass Effect 3's endings are all basically the same because it was a theme of fatalism and of cycles and like how it was supposed to like establish the inevitability of what was going to happen. And
Which is bullshit.
It's bullshit, and that doesn't fit with the ethos of the rest of the Mass Effect series. But my main problem is that even if you buy that premise, it still undermines the fact that they sold this game off of choices and consequence. Like in the case of Mass Effect 3, one of the specific advertising points was that there was going to be a multitude of endings based on your choices throughout, and then it turned out that wasn't what happened at all.
Well, in the strictest sense of the word, the choices that you could get were based on certain choices that you made, yes. I mean,
From like 10
technically it was
seconds ago.
correct.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
speaking about technically being correct, let's go back to Unrest, which, you said, one of the opening, let's call it, like, selling points was that characters do things, and that becomes part of the storyline, and you make choices, and those choices are incorporated into the narrative. And that is technically true.
Yeah, if you manage to escape the city with the peasant girl, then you'll see her friend once as another character, and also, actually, one thing I was kind of surprised by was that the woman in charge of the farms, Lakshmi, she's actually like more tense and more she's like more on edge because of that, and she'll bring it up to you when you're the mercenary captain. She'll say, "Hey, I've got these two fugitives on the run, and if I don't catch them, then I'm probably going to fucking lose control of the farms. Like at worst, we could get a mass exodus, and then what are we going to do about food?"
Yeah, that is one of the examples where it does sort of feed back into the actual, I want to say main story.
Yeah, but barely. And
But
usually
barely.
it's not even that. Like I in my first playthrough, as the priest, I was very loyal.
I was going to bring him up too. Yeah.
Yeah, I was very loyal, and I stuck with the Ranveer
And the temple.
Yeah, stuck with the temple. That's what I meant to say. Through to the very end, and then it was just like, all right, that was your first day as a priest. Good job. and he was never brought up again. And then the second playthrough, I said, okay, this time I'm going to find that this job is not for me, and I'm going to quit, even though that's probably going to screw over my family. And then he quit, and then it was never brought up again.
I sold medicine the second time. I gave out bread to whoever, and then I sold the medicine. And then one Naga was like, "You shouldn't go to the streets in the West because my brothers are there and they'll fuck you up." So then I made a point of going to the streets in the West, and there was nobody there.
Yeah, I don't know what was supposed to happen because
Maybe
I did the same thing. I did the very same thing.
Maybe you should go there with medicine or something. I'm not entirely sure. The point is that, particularly in the priest chapter, nothing you do feeds into the larger story.
And I will say that I went back at the Kickstarter page. I went back to look at everything after I played through the game, and I realized that the priest story, as well as the peasant girl story,
and the Naga story,
even the Naga story, I guess so.
I think I remember that being one of the stretch goals. Let me look it up.
Yeah. Those. What I was going to say was those were marked as stretch goals. And so maybe they didn't see as much of a problem with it because those were supposed to be side stories that you get because they got more funding than they were expecting to. But if that's the case, that diminishes from the whole. It diminishes from the fact that this was supposed to be a game where all the choices you're making have consequences.
Oh no, I remember now that the Naga was a later stretch goal that wasn't made, which was going to be, I think, a Naga.
Well, wait a minute. It says, actually, I'm looking at it right now. It says, a new chapter in Unrest where you play as a Naga immigrant inside the city of Bimra. That's a $25,000 stretch goal. So they made it, but we didn't get that chapter.
Is that there?
I see it. I don't
I'm looking at the wrong... Yeah, so that wasn't actually incorporated, or it was the Naga at the start.
Yeah, I don't know. And you know, if it wasn't incorporated, I don't even mind. I don't really care that much about stretch goals.
That's more a thing about Kickstarter as a whole that we could also be talking about, but maybe like next podcast. I have some things to say about that, but let's skip the Kickstarter part of it for now. Except for saying that you and I think, both liked the Peasant Girl story the best.
Yeah, I love Tanya's story so much that I actually remember her name.
I keep forgetting, but I can't help it. But then if you look at the stretch goals, it's that the first two stretch goals were the priest and the peasant girl, and a day in the life of Asha, the princess, and Xian. And I'm like, if they hadn't made those stretch goals, what would have been left? Just literally only.
He said there were 3 chapters. He said there were 3 chapters originally, and he said that in each one of them you played a different character. Now, I'm pretty sure the playable characters in this game are, you play as Asha at the very beginning for like 10 seconds, and I guess that's the day in the life of Asha. And then, after that, you play as the Naga ambassador. Then you play as Tanya the peasant girl. Then you play as Asha again as a slum girl. Then you play as
Bhagwan the priest.
Yeah, Bhagwan the priest. Then you play as Asha again as she's talking with the conspirators. Then you play as Xiam. Then you play as Asha at the very end. And then there's like a 10-second long epilogue where you play as some spy talking to a Naga lady about...
One of the main Naga ladies, but you are literally a faceless priest.
Yes.
Not faceless literally, but literally a nameless priest, I should have said.
Yeah, I can't remember if there was a name, but yeah, it's like...
No, she's called Naga Informant.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, it's a very transparent epilogue.
It's a very lacking epilogue. I think everybody feels that.
Yeah, on Twitter at least, I have a
failure of Unrest is the fact that it doesn't epilogue well.
Yeah, and it changes slightly based on like specific things they'll mention. Like, I thought that the ending I got would have been a major difference at the end. Like, the second time I went through, I chose not to kill the main bad guy. Yeah, and then fucking what's his face, Avinash, comes in, and then he's like, "Oh well, fuck you. I'm gonna rule then."
Really?
Yeah.
That happened?
Did that not happen to you? Or did
No,
you
he
not
was like,
choose
you
that?
shouldn't have let him go, and I was like, fuck you, I do what I want. And then he was like, okay.
Huh.
Interesting.
Oh wait, no. You must have chosen that. You were like, "I'm going to rule, but I'll let you like escape."
Yeah,
Is that what you
basically.
chose? Yeah. I chose. I don't want to be queen anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That
That
would
was.
explain why someone else would take power then, yes.
Yeah, I was like, because I went through the whole dialogue with VJ, where he explained himself and stuff, and then I went, and like at this point I was thinking maybe I'm just role playing an Asha who's just fucking tired of this, and then she goes, you know what, I'm done, you can just rule, I'll leave, and then Avinash comes up and goes, no, if you're not gonna kill him, then I will, and I'll be the king. Or
Because
whatever.
that's how it works.
Yep, that's how politics work. Um, and yeah, and that barely changed the dialogue in the epilogue. It was like, what's your face went, I didn't see that coming. I thought Asha was going to rule. And then the rest of the dialogue in the epilogue thing just went exactly as it did before. And on the one hand, I get it. I get that that's sort of a theme of inevitability. In fact, like the word inevitable is brought up several times in the game, and it sort of has this theme of like this city is fucked no matter what.
It's
So
probably going to be really bad and then maybe better.
yeah, maybe better, or maybe the Naga are gonna just fuck everything up. Maybe the city's gonna die. Who knows? You don't get to know a player because this game is over. Here's some credits. Um, but yeah. And
One
that
of
was
the
another
things.
thing. The credits just show up. There isn't even like a fade out. It's just like it cuts to a picture of like space or whatever and some upbeat like electronic music and the credits show up. I think this game would have benefited a lot from cutscenes. Even like we gamers like to shit on like cutscenes that are just like zooming in on concept art while a narration plays or some text plays. But I think that would have worked much better than what we got in this game. Because what we got was a lot of telling and not showing. We never actually saw any riots in this game.
You
We
never
didn't
see any of the big events in this game, period.
we didn't get to see the riots. We didn't get to see the assassination. We didn't get to see the final battle at the end. It just like Shyam disappears and Asha is there,
Yeah, it's
and all the palace guards are replaced with rebel soldiers, and it's just like, oh, I guess the invasion happened. You know?
if you're playing Xiam and you follow the messenger back, you get this resolution of, oh, hey, they entered the palace through the secret tunnels. Now either surrender or get killed. But if you pick another path for Xiam, which is what I did the second time, where it was like, I'm just gonna go to a wall and just look at the fire or whatever. Then you just jump cut to Asha
Yeah.
being there, and it's like,
You
huh,
just jump cut, yeah.
what happened? How did anything?
It seems like we made a lot of similar choices in like both our first and second playthroughs. I guess it has to do with now that I know what what things are going to happen, I'll try to subvert those
Yeah,
and see what
that's
changes.
what I did too. Because of the whole idea of choice, I got to my ending and I was disappointed a little bit with the epilogue, and I was a little disappointed that the side vignettes, basically everything that isn't Asha or Shyam, doesn't really feed into the resolution at all. Because like you get one or two mentions of the peasant girl, and the priest isn't mentioned at all, and you can actually make the Naga ambassador survive. I don't know if that is what happened with you in either
Yeah.
playthrough.
Yeah, in the
But
second
that
one
just
he
never
survived.
comes up. And then I was like, okay, is it possible to do it entirely differently? Can I fuck up? Can I change the course of history in any significant way? But then I played it again and I did, I think, only opposite choices. And it was just the same story beats.
Yeah, the same story beats, and
major things happen.
because like after the Naga ambassador died and Rhea took over as the like Naga like
Diver
representative in the council. I had forgotten after that ambassador was about to retire, and I was like, oh, I wonder if things would have been different if I had survived that. Would he be the person? And then I played it and I went, oh, it's his last mission before retiring because they didn't want to make consequences. You know,
That
like
is a very cynical way of looking at it, but simultaneously, if you go on the outing, like you talk to the king and queen, and then you talk to Rhea, and then you have that quote you like so much, if you go out. And then either the game immediately cuts to, then the next day, the Naga and the king and the queen went out, and they all got killed. And if you make the Naga not go, you say, no, I'm going to adamantly refuse, I'm going to go back to Naga Town and enjoy my retirement, then the game cuts to, and then 2 weeks later, another Naga went out with the king and
yeah,
queen. They all got killed.
it's very just you cannot change anything about
And
this.
that is, like, it's something that I want to complain about, but also not, because, like, in Mass Effect, to bring up Mass Effect again, the same story beats are also hit, and in Fallout, and in New Vegas, and in all the big story RPGs, the skeleton of the story is usually the same, and
It's
it's only
always
the
the
side
same,
consequences that change. It's just that the side consequences in Unrest are so invisible. It doesn't seem to influence anything.
Yeah,
Like in
and
Mass
and
Effect, you make
again,
choices, and then characters get different outfits, or they have different dialogues, and maybe missions play out a little differently. And in the end, you still have to pick a color and do in the universe. But in Unrest, it's only really like certain lines of dialogue that change, and
yeah,
beyond that, graphically, gameplay-wise, nothing really changes.
nothing changes. And I mean, I understand since it's a game very heavily based around dialogue. Um, I understand that like if dialogue is the only thing that changes, that makes sense because it's a dialogue driven game, but I would expect more dialogue to change, especially since none of it is voice acted. I feel like they could have afforded to have the main story play out a little bit differently. Um
You hope that they could have, but then Rutskarn did this really candid write-up of the costs involved in making the game, and it looks like they just had a lot of financial, not necessarily difficulties, but it was difficult for them to spend any more time on Unrest than they already did.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. The budget of this game definitely shows. Like I said before, there's no cutscenes. There's no like showing a concept art of a person killing the king as it explains that the king died because they very clearly only had an engine for walking around and talking to people, and that's about it. Um, the the traits system, while interesting, does not really change anything. The whole system of disposition. That's
Which we
another.
haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah, I had forgotten to mention that. There's like a triple axis of disposition, which I've never seen before in a game, and it's like friendship or likability, something like that, and then respect, and then fear.
That's
And
correct.
each of those is disconnected from one another. So you can have a person that doesn't like you but respects you and fears you. So it's like I don't really care if he likes me. He's gonna do what I want. But the thing is, you can't game that system at all. You can't like changing how people like you doesn't change anything
It
because
doesn't
this
seem
story.
to change anything.
Yeah, I mean I played it twice and I didn't see any differences. And I think part of that is because this story is so fleeting and like each story with each character is so brief. You don't really get a chance for a character to do something that they wouldn't have done otherwise. Um like I thought maybe VJ wouldn't have been as much of a dick on my second playthrough if I made him like Asha more, but no, he still assassinates everyone. He still makes her have to live as a slum girl, all of that. And I guess that's because they really wanted that whole, you know,
Well,
uh,
that's the main story skeleton. Again,
like
it's
Vizier usurps the throne and the princess girl has to like retake the throne. It's like it's a very like standard sort of story in that sense. I mean, how many times have we seen that like the king's right hand man betrayed him?
it's
That
basically
sort
the
of thing.
Lion King, except with Indian people instead of lions.
Yeah. He's Jafar. He's Jafar.
No, not even. Like, he's Scar and he kills Mufasa, and then Simba goes off to live in a slum, except Simba actually lives in a paradise. And then
Yeah.
someone finds him, Inmala finds him, Avash finds Asha, and then takes him back, and then suddenly victory.
Yeah.
And then you can talk to the bad guy, and then in a few of the outings, he dies anyway. But yeah, it's the disposition system and the trait system are particularly interesting because they show that, like what you said, a lot of care and effort have gone into making an engine that really supports role playing and dialogue and playing a character that you want and keeping track of everything and giving you the information that you need at any given time without interrupting the dialogue. And it's all really good. And then it's just not used. I want to say it's not used to its full potential, but it's just not used to any potential.
Yeah. I don't know, and that's why I can't hate the game. It shows a ton of potential, and I feel like if other developers, or if this developer, uses that, like uses the ideas here and uses this engine they have to create more stories that have more branching paths and more options available, then that would be awesome. And like I also feel kind of bad for complaining about not having enough options, because I'm usually put off when like old school RPG fans go on about choices not meaning anything if there aren't like big lasting consequences for them, because I don't really agree with that on principle. Like, one of my favorite games is the original Deus Ex. Like, in fact, I think pretty much my favorite choice given to me in a game was the final choice in the first Deus Ex about whether to like join the Illuminati, merge with Helios, or blow up the whole place. Sorry, spoiler alert for a friggin' 14-year-old game. And the thing is, that didn't really have any consequences besides a tiny cutscene at the end of the game, but it was such an interesting choice in its own right that I loved it. And that's how I feel about, like, Unrest. I feel like I should like this because it has such great world building and all of that, but my expectations were built up because of the Kickstarter pitch and all of that, and I expected a lot of role playing potential, and I expected a lot of options that would play out later in the game. I expected, as Rutsgarn said, he said, there are three main chapters, and in each one you play a different character, and whether they succeed or give up or fail or change their mind or die, when trying to do what they want to do, that becomes part of the storyline. That becomes the narrative that's passed down to the next chapter. I thought,
and that hardly happens.
That is, it feels token when it actually happens, because the storyline, like when it says that becomes the narrative is like, the general narrative is basically the same no matter what, whether the Naga dude dies or goes away, that the narrative is going to play out the same way. And like, that's how a lot of RPGs play out, but I felt like I was promised more in this case.
Yeah, I had a similar thing with the first part of the quote, where it's like, most fun in an RPG when the game recognizes what you're trying to do with your character and incorporates that in the narrative, when it recognizes the choices that you're making. And I mean, it doesn't really do that in any meaningful sense. It's what you say about the ending of Deus Ex, I remember, because it is an entirely meaningless choice, and nothing in Deus Ex has steered you this way. It's just literally that at the ending you get the choice of three buttons, which is like Mass Effect and like the other Deus Ex, and probably like Fable and like a whole bunch of other games that work this way. And Unrest is kind of the opposite, where it carefully tracks what your character does and what the personality is that you can glean from the character through what you say and what you want and the choices that you've made. And then at the end, it's just the same story.
Yeah. It's not three different ending cutscenes based on the choice you make at the very end. It's the same cutscene no matter what, or the same dialogue no matter what, with very slight changes based on what you've done throughout.
Well, yeah, not based on the many choices that you did make throughout.
Yeah.
So initially, I thought the narrative was not very good because of that. Like I said, I've since come to think that it's a mistake to think as Unrest of one big narrative, and it's probably more fitting to think of it as like little story vignettes into this world building, where you look at the fact that the priest chapter doesn't influence the larger story in any way, isn't the point, because the point is to show you what it's like for a priest to live in this city and to have to hand out bread and medicine and have to make these choices.
Yeah, and
And
it humanizes Ranveer a little bit. It gives us more insight into what like his own motivations and stuff. And you can even find out like if you challenge him at the end where you're basically like, I don't are you trying to make an army here? He'll flat out say, I'm not going to lie, that's kind of what I'm doing because I think that's what's best for the city. And I thought that was a cool little reveal.
yeah, again, the writing and the character building is quite good.
Oh yeah.
And it's just that.
I think it's just a matter of expectations. Like, I think in my case, at least, my expectations were a lot higher than they would have been. I think if I just saw Unrest on the Steam page, and I was just like, oh, this looks like a neat game about a story in ancient India, and I just bought it and I played through it, I think I would have been a lot less disappointed than I am now.
For me, there's a lot of systems that don't pay off, and that bothers me. It's the inventory doesn't do much, like you said. The trade system and the disposition system don't do anything. There are actually controls for combat in the game that you asked Brutskarn if they were ever applicable, and he said there's 3 possible combats in the game.
Yeah.
Something like that. I played through it twice and I haven't encountered any of them.
Yeah. I encountered a situation in which my character killed another person, but it didn't go into combat mode. It was just a dialogue thing. It said, your character jumps forward and stabs him, and then your character dies. Because the soldiers all jumped on him. And that was with Xiam. Yeah, that was with Xiam.
There's another situation or two with Xiam where you can kill people and it's not combat mode.
Yeah, it just happens.
And even
so I don't.
Even the instantiations with actually meaningful choice feel a little cheated that way. For instance, Tanya's story, I think one of the reasons we both like it so much is because that's one of the only situations in the game where you feel like you have to make really difficult choices.
Yes,
like,
and
do
there's
you
like
stay, or do you run away, or do you steal the dowry? And...
yeah, there's like 4 different ways that can play out, in theory anyway.
Yeah,
because
like
you
that.
can just go along with it. You know, they're telling you have to marry this guy, and you can just go along with it. You can say, no, I would rather die. You can escape alone, and you can escape with what's-her-face.
It's not that you just go up to your mother and say, I would rather die, and then you die, is it?
Well,
I mean, you can try to steal money, and then you can fail or succeed. You can actually succeed at stealing the dowry.
I actually don't even know all the ways it can play out, because when I did it, it was Tanya, like, tried to steal the dowry and got caught. And
how did you get caught, though?
How did it play out with you? Because with me, it was I tried to steal the dowry, and I also tried to steal a little bit of that, like, one pile.
The valuables? Yeah, that
valuables.
Seemed like an obvious trap to me.
Yeah, I took, like, I didn't take all of it, but I took, like, a few of the most valuable things sitting on it, because I was like, oh, nobody's looking. And then as I was leaving that zone, a guard went, hey, look, that's the lady, she stole a thing. And then locks me, like, I had a dialogue with her, and she's like, do you not realize that you have to do blah, blah, blah? We're in dire times, such and such. Are you going to be so spiteful that you'd rather die than such and such? And then I went, yeah, I'd rather die. And then I died.
I tried to steal the dowry by splitting it with the guard, and then I buried the rest under the rock. And the game actually acknowledges that if you do that, another guard comes up and is like, huh, this looks odd, but it's probably nothing. And then you can actually go to dude's father and tell him about it. But I was like, no, I'm going to be clever. I'm going to tell my mother that we go along with the marriage, and then when they have to find the dowry, they'll find it's missing. Ha ha ha. And then it's going to be cancelled. But then they just interrogate the guard, and he's like, yeah, she was here. She got it. And then you get the same situation that Lakshmi talks to you.
Well,
spoilers, etc. Anyway, it's the fact that the systems don't really play into the narrative that I think is my biggest disappointment. To give you another example, the second time you play as Asha, the first time you really play as Asha, you're in the slums, and you have to go beg for food. And there's a few things you can do. You can join some gang, you can lie to some snakes, you can get a trick played on you by a soldier, and it all gives you bread of various sizes. And narratively, The first time I basically just did what was necessary to get food because
Yeah,
I
same
figured
here.
I need to get food. But if you overlay the gameplay on the narrative, like the systems, it doesn't matter. There is no systemization that incentivizes you to get food, and there are
Be-
no penalties or consequences if you don't get a lot of food.
yeah,
So if you want to roleplay your character story-wise, that works because you can just do it. But gameplay-wise, there's just this massive disconnect,
yes,
and I
yeah,
think that
and
is for
gameplay
the
does
whole of it.
definitely matter in this context, because they tried to systemize it all, and there wasn't really anything there for the food. Like, and you know, and you can give a story explanation for it and say, oh, it's because you met the guy like immediately after, like, because what happens is you go and you talk to J Deep, and I'm probably pronouncing all these names wrong.
So that's
Um,
what I pronounce it too.
Yeah, and it's especially damning in my case because I'm the one that's half Persian, and half of my family has names like that. Um, so I should probably be the one saying things right. But whatever, I don't care. Anyway, you talk to J Deep, and then you turn around and take 3 steps in the other direction, and oh hey look, it's Avinash, and he's like, hey, I found you, join our resistance. And if you say no, he's like, no, you're joining our resistance. Trust me, it'll be
Yep,
good. And then you go,
it'll be
and
cool.
there's no way out of it. And so however much bread you got doesn't matter because now you're in the resistance and they're feeding you. So
Yep, and it's. I think if I had to summarize my disappointment, the part of Unrest that I'm disappointed with, in a single sense, it would be the narrative and the gameplay systems don't interact at all
yeah,
because
they do not.
they don't. And going even further, there are very little gameplay systems. It is Unrest is basically a really well written visual novel where you occasionally have to click to make a character walk across a really well drawn but quite static version of an Indian city.
Oh yeah, and that's another thing. It's static. All the characters are static. This is another place where the budget really shows. The characters never move. You are the only one that moves, and that's a thing that bothers me in games in general. Is it makes the world feel very, very fake when you're the only person who's willing to walk around. Every other NPC is glued to the floor. Because then it's like this isn't a big living, bustling city full of people. This is an MMO.
And that is the combination of the static nature and the lack of gameplay systems makes that it doesn't really sell you all that well on the idea of that these slums are dangerous and dirty and that the city is pretty and that you have to fight to survive and that there's this real disconnect and that there's riots brewing because it just doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, yeah. That you never see a riot, and when you're in the slums, I mean, it has like it has music that sounds chaotic, and like that for a moment will make you feel like, oh my god, I'm in the dangerous slums. Until you walk around and
Danger
realize
Zone.
that nobody's doing anything, that everybody's
Nobody can
standing
touch
around.
you. At least
Yeah,
I am pretty sure that Asha cannot die and Asha cannot quit. And again, that's because that's how the story works. But
yeah,
simultaneously, the priest can quit, but it doesn't matter. And the peasant girl can die, but it doesn't matter. And I mean, it matters if you're invested in these characters. So the first time it did actually matter to me, which again is a testament to the strength of just the writing. But gameplay wise, mechanics wise, it doesn't connect to anything that comes after it.
yeah. I don't know. I don't want to tell you guys it's a bad game and you shouldn't play it because it is worth playing for the world building, for all of that, and for all the potential on display.
This is true.
It's worth noting.
This
It's
is what we're doing here is basically criticizing, which is a good thing. Because I think a game that comes after this, that uses this system and that uses the engine and even the graphical style I can deal with in the little static nature, but that uses the good parts of this to craft a larger story that actually takes character choices and decisions into account. I think that would be really good.
yeah, like that sounds like an awesome game. That sounds like the game that I backed. um or, you know, the game I wanted when I backed this one.
So
But
yeah, I think that's basically everything we have to say about it.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's I think that's pretty much it.
And we're almost at an hour, which makes this a good moment to stop too.
Good call. Alright guys, so Unrest. That is a game, and those are the things we think about it. Let us know if you like this podcast format. Let us
know what you think of Unrest.
Yeah, absolutely, that too. And tell us how you think we can improve this. If you want us to get more people, if you want us to get the weird foreign guy out of here, if you want us
That's not nice to yourself, Justin. You're only half
I know, person. I'm sorry. I'm only half weird. But yeah, if you want us to talk about a variety of things on a podcast instead of one game, that's cool too. We'll try to make it work. Yeah. See you next time,
thank
Internet.
You for listening, and see you next time.
Yeah, that. Where's the stop recording button?